Good evening. You're watching Tonight Live. I'm Nana Aquare. Now it's time for our real story, where I speak to an individual with an extraordinary tale to tell. Nick Wilson is an army veteran. After 14 years of service and multiple deployments across the globe, he left the army suffering from chronic pain and post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, in a bid to understand the workings of the mind, Nick studied cognitive behavioural therapy, mental health first aid and neurolinguistics programming, where he became a trainer and a practitioner in all three disciplines. Also, he's passionate about helping others who are struggling with mental health. He launched his second business, a mental health consultancy called 360 Wellbeing. Nick then began to help organisations large and small to develop wellbeing strategies for their workforce. Through this battle with PTSD and depression, Nick has shown his resilience and became a successful mental health campaigner and a businessman. He's dedicated his life to raise awareness, reduce stigma amongst men's mental health, and he joins me now. Nick, welcome. Wow. So you've been a bit.
Good evening.
Good evening. You've been a very busy man. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you ended up doing all this.
Well, like you say, I served 14 years in the British Army, and I left 8 years ago. During my service, I deployed on multiple operations around the globe, including multiple Northern Ireland, Kosovo, Iraq and Afghanistan tours. So kind of saw a lot of war zones, a lot of horrendous things. The worst of humanity and the best of humanity, I like to think. And on leaving 8 years ago, I was 2 years. But then come year 3, that's when I experienced burnout. I attempted suicide, and I then went into rehabilitation with Combat Stress, which is a military charity supporting veterans and service personnel who are struggling with the mental health, where I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Whilst I was in there, I sold the chauffeur company, and I turned 40 years old. So it was literally 5 years last week since all this happened. And I then kind of made a promise to myself that I wanted to reframe all these really negative things and all this stuff that has happened to me. I wanted to be able to reframe it and use it for good, and for something good to come out of it. And that was where the idea was formed to then set up the mental health consultancy, which started going really well, you know. The problem I had was I've also got 7 prolapsed discs in my spine. So I'm physically disabled as well, which results in chronic pain. And then I was also diagnosed with fibromyalgia just before lockdown last year. So I had to stand down as director and gave 360 Wellbeing to my partner. Just said, go off, make something of yourself and enjoy it. And then I founded a men's mental health peer support group last May.
Wow. That's incredible. So you mentioned that you're disabled. What happened? Was there an accident or something, or was it just something that...
There was nothing kind of juicy, if you like, you know. It was a combination of all the tours that I've been on, the physical activities, and basically my spine just said, no thanks, can't do this anymore. And so 3 of the prolapsed discs are in my neck, which is why I'm propped up in this mobility bed. Not very attractive, but unfortunately it's just how it is, you know. And I've learned that, you know, it's our environment that really makes us disabled. And I'm a big believer that through managing mindset and your environment, that you can actually remove the disc from disability and become abled.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry to hear that. And how does it affect you physically then? Are you in a wheelchair, or are you able to walk and move around?
I can walk for short distances, I can stand for short periods, and I can sit down for short periods. I'm likely to end up in a wheelchair at some point soon.
Oh, no, he's frozen. Oh, he's frozen.
On
Oh, you can still hear. We can still hear you.
another.
We can just about hear you. Well, what we're going to... I mean, listen, I mean, that's awful, isn't it? If you're able-bodied and suddenly you go through that. I mean, it's an awful thing anyway. I watched this incredible programme actually called Being Frank. It was actually on the BBC. And it was Frank Gardner, I think his name is. He's a famous broadcast journalist. And he was shot in, I'm not sure exactly where, but he was shot whilst carrying out, you know, some journalistic broadcasts in the war. And he was paralysed. And I think the stat was that I think it's every 3 hours somebody becomes paralysed in a way. And I mean, it was quite frightening the way he had to change his life. I mean, that must really be, or even any sort of disability or any sort of, you know, I remember when I ruptured my ACL, my cruciate ligament in my knee, it was so amazing that I thought, oh my goodness, little things that I thought I could do, which I hadn't even thought about, I suddenly realised how difficult it was.
In fact, there's quite a lot of work within clinical settings to make sure that when diagnoses, for example, are given to people which will be very life-changing, that there is some psychological input and psychological support afforded to them, because that really, you know, you go from thinking that your life is going to go one way.
Famous broadcast journalist, and he was shot in, I'm not sure exactly where, but he was shot whilst carrying out, you know, some journalistic broadcasts in the war, and he was paralysed. And I think the stat was that I think it's every 3 hours somebody becomes paralysed in a way. And I mean, it was quite frightening the way he had to change his life. I mean, that must really be, or even any sort of disability or any sort of, you know, I remember when I ruptured my ACL, my cruciate ligament in my knee, it was so amazing that I thought, oh my goodness, little things that I thought I could do, which I hadn't even thought about, I suddenly realised how difficult it was.
In fact, there's quite a lot of work within clinical settings to make sure that when diagnoses, for example, are given to people which will be very life-changing, that there is some psychological input and psychological support afforded to them, because that really, you know, you go from thinking that your life is going to go one way, or you have an identity in your mind that says, oh, I'm a healthy person, or I'm this, I'm that, and then suddenly you then acquire a diagnosis for something which may require a lifetime of support. But actually, we are getting better within the clinical setting of being able to accommodate that. I think what I'm really inspired by with Nick is the things that he does for other people, but I want to know where he's getting his support.
Well, you might have
You've got this kind of symbolism. Is Nick
He's back?
Yeah. Nick, it's incredible hearing your story, and really quite shocking to hear what you're going through physically. And the spine is the column of support for the whole of our body. You're very good at supporting other people, particularly with their mental health. But what support are you getting? Where are you getting your support?
If I'm totally honest, I'll probably say I'm the world's biggest hypocrite in a way, because it's only just recently that I've started actually taking better care of myself. It's you know, when I identified that my purpose in life, my whole meaning for being, is to help other people and to help, you know, to inspire and educate and empower others to be able to better manage their own mental well-being. That's what I'm all about. But as you know, one of these token kind of comments that you see around was, you can't pour from an empty cup, and that one really stayed with me, you know. But this. It's also been kind of support just been run off their feet. It's really impacted appointments and who you can access, who you can see, who you can't see. And that's part of my message now, that we as individuals really have to take responsibility, take ownership of our own well-being, because the NHS long-term mental health plan is solely based around self-referral. So if you aren't proactive, if you're not motivated, then you're really going to struggle to get the effective support that you need. And I've experienced that firsthand myself, even April this month, when I reached out to my local crisis team, and they refused to speak to me. When I said to them that I was feeling extremely suicidal and I need support now, they told me that they'll get someone out to me in about 5-6 weeks.
Wow.
Wow, and you expect
Wow.
to just sit around and that's the thing, isn't it? The NHS and the support is great, but sometimes it takes an age to get some sort of help. And being given that 5 to 6 weeks, did you just simply wait for the 5 to 6 weeks, or is this why you started to set your own thing up and try and help others?
No, this was April this year. So luckily, there's a new, for veterans, military personnel, there's a new service called HIS, which is High Intensity Service. And that team for veteran personnel only launched this year. They came down within 2 days of hearing about me. So, this isn't a blame to the NHS or anything like that. It is what it is. The brilliant NHS service we've got, unfortunately, is pretty much solely set up for physical health, especially the systems that run it. I've learned over the years, not just from CBT, NLP and things like that, but I've also done my own research. I've also looked into PTSD. I've gained a much better understanding of what mental health is and what my illnesses are, and I've identified my own mind care plan. And so I know what coping mechanisms work for what kind of symptom. I know the people I can go to for either black and white kind of advice or those who are more emotionally empathetic towards me. And it's really important with this. Really, my big message to everyone out there is gain better knowledge, gain a bit of an education around general mental health, and ask everyone how you're getting on. But you really need to accept that just talking to someone isn't enough anymore. In social media, it was really big, wasn't it, after the past 3 years or so? There's been so much talk on social media, must talk. It's really good to talk. It's not weak to speak. And whilst that's absolutely the right thing to do, it's not enough anymore. You've got to be able to talk out. You've got to accept where you're at. You've got to accept help. You've then got to be really proactive yourself. You've got to be able to navigate the mental health services because the pathways aren't that clear. And almost because there's so much support out there for mental health now, it's almost really overwhelming and quite confusing to identify where you live, because it changes from region to region. What is the best place to access the pathways? Going to your GP isn't always the best thing to do for you. So whilst it'll be the first thing I say to people that obviously go to your GP, but you can self-refer to the IAPT, you can go down to A&E, you can ring Samaritans, you can text Shout. There's more and more men's support groups around the UK now. So really do a little bit of research on what support is available within your specific region for your specific demographic. But you've got to do more nowadays, and we really need to be watching out for one another. We called it the buddy-buddy system in the army. And if you concentrate on looking after someone else, you can trust that someone else is looking after you. If we can get just a little bit of that mentality happening within general society, it will make a massive difference and literally save lives.
Wow, well, so good to talk to you. Lisa, you've campaigned for mental health, haven't you?
Yeah,